What's up everyone, welcome back to another episode of AWS tutorial, and today's video is going to be a complimentary piece of an old video that I have where I talked about how to build a serverless API with a Lambda function and an API gateway. In that video, I wrote Lambda code in Node.js, and I got a lot of requests asking me to do a similar video in Python because Python is a very popular language, and a lot of people use it for software development nowadays. So I figured it might be a good idea to do a similar video in Python because it will be beneficial to a lot of people. In that old video, I also talked about what a serverless API is and its advantages over non-serverless APIs. So if you haven't watched it, I'll include a link down below, so you can check that out if you're interested. But in today's video, I'm just going to focus on the implementation part of it. So without further ado, let's get to it. Alright, so right now I'm on the homepage of the AWS console, and step number 1 of the process is to create a DynamoDB table to host our data for the CRUD API. So I'm going to type in Dynamo, open that into a new tab, and then I'm going to hit Create Table. Give it a name, I'm just going to call it Product Inventory. And then for the partition key, I'm just going to use Product ID. And then for the data type, I'm just keep it as string, but you can change it to number if you want to. And then for the settings, I'll just use all the default settings. Alright, so this is done and the table is active. And now we can move on to step number 2, which is to create a Lambda function for our API. But before we can do that, we need to create an IAM role so that the Lambda function can use it to access our DynamoDB table. So I'm gonna type in IAM, click on roles, and then create a new role. We're gonna choose Lambda because the Lambda function is gonna use it. And now we're going to attach 2 policies to it. One is the CloudWatch full permission, so that we can look at logs for the API requests. And then the other one is Dynamo full access because we wanted to access the DynamoDB to do modifications and creations. So I'm going to type in CloudWatch full access, check it, and then we're going to type in DynamoDB full access as well. Hit next. And now you can see that we have 2 policies selected for this role. And now I'm gonna give it a name. I'll just call it Serverless API role. Hit create. Alright, so that is done. And now we can move on to create a Lambda function for our API code. So I'm gonna type in Lambda. Hit create function. I'm gonna select from scratch. Give it a name, I'll just call it Serverless API Lambda. And we're going to choose Python. And 3.9 is the most updated version that is available. And then under permissions, we're going to choose the role that we just created. I believe it's that one. And then hit create. Okay, so it's done. Before we move on, I'm going to change 2 things in the setting. So I'm going to go to configurations, and then under general configuration, I'm going to change the memory setting and the timeout setting because the default setting is only 3 seconds and 128 megabytes. Typically, 128 is enough, but I'm not sure what you're going to do with the API. So let's change it to 500. That should be more than sufficient. And then 1 minute for the timeout. Hit save. And now we're ready to move on to the next step, which is to create an API gateway to connect everything. So I'm going to type in API gateway. Okay, so this is the homepage for API gateway. And you have 4 options right here. We're going to build the RESTful API, so we're going to choose this. Make sure that this is the one that you choose so that you can follow along. So I'm going to click Build REST API. Hit OK. I'm going to choose New API, give it a name. I would call it Serverless API. Keep it as original. Create. Okay, so now we're going to create some resources for our path that the API is going to have. So the first one is going to be health. We're going to check enable gateway course or API gateway course. Create. And then go back to the root. We are gonna create 2 more. The first one is products, where we do operations on a single product. And then lastly, we're gonna have a products path, where we do operations for multiple products. Hit create. And then under health, we're gonna have a get method. That is just for the user to check whether the API is healthy or not. We're gonna choose Lambda. We're gonna check use Lambda proxy integration. This is very important. Make sure you choose this option here. And in here, we're gonna choose the Lambda function that we just created earlier, which is that. Then hit save, hit OK. And then next, under products, we're gonna have a get method, where we just get a single product by an ID. We're gonna do the same thing here. Lambda function, use Lambda proxy integration, and then select the Lambda function that we just created. And then next, we're gonna have a post method under product, where we want to create a single product or insert it into the database. The next one is the patch method, where we want to modify a single item in our database. And then finally, we're going to have a delete item under product, that we want to delete a single item from our database. And then finally, under the products path, we are going to have a get method, where we want to get all the products in our database. Okay, so this is done. And now remember, the last step that we have to do in order to make the API active is to deploy that. And we're going to create a new stage. We're just going to call it prod and hit deploy. And now we have a new stage called prod, and this is the endpoint for the API. And one thing I want to mention is that right now the API is open to the world. Anyone can access it if they know this endpoint URL. I have a separate video that talks about how to do authentications on an API in order to access it using API keys. I'll include a link down below, so if you're interested, you can check that out. But in this video, I'm just not gonna get into the details of it. And now we are ready to move on to the final step, which is to write the code for the API. You can write the code in the Lambda console if you want, but I just prefer an IDE for that because it's just easier with the syntax. So I'm just gonna write that in PyCharm. Okay, so right now I have PyCharm open a empty folder called tutorial in my laptop. And step number one is to create a Python file for our Lambda function. And the name has to be lambda underscore function.py because that's what we have configured as our handler. So I'm going to do new Python file, lambda function. And the handler function that's going to be called by the lambda function is called lambda handler. So I'm going to define that function first. That takes in an event object and a context object. I'll do pass for now. So this is basically the entry point for our Lambda functions. Whenever you hit it, it's gonna get into this function to call other methods. And now we're gonna import all the modules that we want, what we need for the API. The first one is Bodo3. And then we also need the JSON module. And then we're gonna use the logging module as well. And in here, we're just gonna define our logger. It's called logging.getLogger. And then we're gonna set the logger level. We are just gonna do info. And then next, we're gonna define our DynamoDB table. The table name, which is, I think we call it product inventory. Let's double check. Go back to the console. I can just copy this. Okay, that's right. And then we're going to define our Dynamo clients. We're going to get that from our Bodo3 that we defined earlier. I'm going to do resource and then DynamoDB. And then next, we're going to get the table. And then we're going to define our methods. The first one is called get method. It's all caps. And then we're going to define the paths we have. The first one is the health. Okay, and now we are ready to define our handler function. We can remove this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to log the request event to see how the request looks like. And then we can extract the HTTP method from our event object. And then we're going to extract the path from our event object as well. And now we're ready to handle all the different scenarios. And the first scenario is that if the HTTP method is equal to our get method and the path is equal to the health check path, we are going to set our response to be 200. And let's define this method here. So it's going to take in a status code and then a body, which is optional. So we're going to set it to be none as optional. So we're going to set the response that has a attribute of status code, which is the status code that's passed in. And then for the headers, we're going to have two attributes inside. One is called content type, application JSON, and then the next one is pretty important if you plan to integrate that with the front end that has a different host name. So this would allow cross-region access. And then after that, we're going to check if the body is not none. That means the user passed in a custom object. We're going to set the response body to be the body. And then finally, we're going to return the response. So one more thing that we need to do with the body here is, so since the object that we get from DynamoDB is in decimals, which is not supported by the default JSON encoder. So right here, we have to define our custom encoder for decimal numbers. So we're going to do that in a separate file. So under our tutorial file, tutorial folder, we're going to create a new Python folder called custom encoder. And in here, we're going to define a class. Just call it custom encoder, but you can call it whatever you want. That takes in a JSON encoder. Let me fix the import here. And then we're going to define a default function that takes in an object. And we're going to check if the object is an instance of a decimal. And if it is, we are going to return a float version of that decimal object. And if not, we can just return a default value of the object, which is the original. And that is our custom encoder. And now we are ready to use it. Let's import that. And then we're going to use it in our function here. Custom encoder. Okay, that is it. So we finished one scenario. So the second scenario is that if the HTTP method is a get method and the path is a product path. Let's fix the name here. That means we want to get a single item. So we're going to set the response to be equal to get product. We're going to define this method later. Event. We're going to take the product ID from our query string parameters. Then we're going to pass in a attribute called product ID. And then the next scenario is when the HTTP method is equal to get and the path is equal to the product's path. That means the user wants to get all the products. So we're gonna call the get products method that gets all the items from our database. We're gonna define that later as well. And then next, we are gonna have a post method. So when the HTTP method equal to post and the path is equal to product path, that means the user wants to create a new item and insert that into our table. So we're gonna call the save product method, and we're gonna extract the request body from the event object. So we're gonna do a JSON.loads event body, and then next, if HTTP method is equal to a patch method and the path is equal to the product path, that means the user wants to modify an item in our database. So we're gonna call the modify product method that is gonna take in a product ID, the update key, and the update value. But let's extract our request body first, and we're gonna extract that from our event object. And then next, we're gonna have a delete method. And again, we're gonna request the body from the event object. And then we're gonna call a delete method that we're gonna define later. That's gonna take in the product ID from our request body. And then finally, if it's none of the above, it will just respond a 404 back to the user. So we're gonna set the response to be just 404, not found, or something like that. And then finally, we are going to return the response back to the API gateway. Okay, that is the skeleton of it. And now we just need to define all these functions to get our products or product from our DynamoDB table. But for the interest of time, I'm just gonna speed up the video and then I'll explain it at the end. Okay, so I just finished writing all the functions and you don't see any errors here anymore. So there are a few things I want to bring up here. So the first thing is when we try to do the error handling, so you need to do your custom error handlings right here. I just log it out in my Lambda. And then the second thing is when we try to get all the products from our DynamoDB table, we're using a while loop here. And the reason for that is if your table is too big, there's a limit on how many items a single operation of the scan can get. And if it's not able to get all of them, it's going to return an attribute of last evaluated key in the response. And we can just check that in our response to see if it's finished or not. And if it doesn't finish, we are just going to keep querying it and append the new response into our results. And then finally we're going to return everything. Oh, that should be result, not response. And then the last thing that I want to mention is in all my methods here, I just customize the return body as operation, what operation it is, and the message I have, and then the item that I want to return back to the user. But you can customize it the way you want. Okay, so this is everything. So I think now we can copy this whole thing and go back to the AWS console, Lambda, and paste it here. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a custom encoder file, just like we do it here. So I'm just gonna do right click and then new file, .py, and then inside here, I will just copy and paste the whole thing. And that should be it. Hit deploy. Okay, and now I think we are ready to test this API out. So I'm gonna go back to API gateway. Copy this URL, that's our endpoint. And then we're gonna open Postman. And we're gonna paste our URL here. But before we do any operations on it, let's go back to the AWS console to make sure that we don't have any items on our DynamoDB first. So click on the product inventory table. And as you can see, item count is 0 and we don't have any items here. And now let's go back to Postman and do a health check on it first. So health, and then it's a get method, hit send. Alright, we get back at 200, which means our API is up and running. And now let's insert some item into our DynamoDB table. So we're going to use a post method and then products. And then hit body, raw, JSON. So it needs to have a product ID, which is a string. I just do 001. Let's do color, red, and then another attribute. Let's do price. Let's do 100. Hit send. Okay, we say that we got back a 200 and it says it's successful. Now let's go back to our DynamoDB. Hit refresh. Oh, I think they changed the UI. So I think we have to go to items here on the left side and we're gonna click here. Alright, so now we have one item, product item here, which matches with what we have submitted here. And now let's create a couple more. And now if we go back to the DynamoDB table, hit refresh, we should be able to see 3 items here on the table. And yes, we got all 3. And now let's just get a single item. Let's get the second one, which is a get method, product. And I believe we say that we're going to do a query parameter, product ID, value as this. And we get back the second item. And if we enter a product ID that's not on the table, let's say 1004, it's going to return a 404 not found. And that's our message. And now let's try to modify one of the items. Let's say that we are going to modify the second item. We don't need this. So in our request body, we're going to say update key. Let's say we're going to modify the price and then we're going to update it to 1000. And I believe it's a patch method. Yep, that's right. We have it updated to be 1000. And let's go back here. Right now it's 200, but if I do refresh, it's 1000. Let's see, what else do we want? Delete. Let's check out delete method. And I believe we just need to pass in. Let's delete the first one. It's successful, and that one got deleted. And let's do refresh, and that is gone. And then finally, we are going to get all the items on our table, which is a get method, and it's a products method, and we don't need that. And it should return both of the items back to me in a list. Internal server error. All right, let's see what happened. So we can go back to the Lambda console, hit monitor, and then view logs in CloudWatch. And let's open that. And there should be the log. Let's see what happened. Key error item, of course. There is a typo here. Let's go back to the code. Get products. And that should be items, not item. That as well. Hit deploy again. And now let's test it one more time. And now it's working. It's returning products as a list of items. Okay, so this is it, everyone. I hope you have learned something. And if you like this video, I hope you can give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video.